Welcome to the TOEFL Listening section. In this part, you will hear one or more conversations in an academic or campus context, such as a discussion between a student and a professor or between two students. You may take notes while listening. Listen to part of a conversation. You will hear it only once, so listen carefully. After the conversation, you will answer questions about what you heard. Some questions will ask you about main ideas and details. Others will ask about implied meaning, speaker attitude, or how ideas relate to one another. Use both what is stated and what is implied to answer.
Good afternoon, Professor Hayes. Thanks for meeting me during office hours to talk about unreliable narrators in modern fiction.
Hello, Marcus, of course. Tell me what aspect you want to focus on for your seminar paper.
I am trying to pin down the narrative techniques authors use to create ambiguity. I have examples like Fight Club and Gone Girl, but I need more precise terminology and analysis.
Those are good examples. First, make sure you define unreliable narrator and distinguish types. For instance, there are narrators who lie deliberately, narrators who are mentally unstable, and narrators who misremember events.
Right, so Chuck Palahniuk in Fight Club is an example of mental instability, and Gillian Flynn in Gone Girl plays with deliberate deception. What term should I use to classify them?
Use terms from narratology. Call the narrator homodiegetic when they are a character inside the story. Then refer to reliability as a property, not a type. Also use focalization to discuss who perceives the events.
When you say focalization, do you mean how the story filters events through the narrator's perspective?
Exactly. Limited first-person focalization is a common technique. Free indirect discourse also helps by blending the narrator's voice with the character's interiority, so the reader cannot separate authorial commentary from subjective perception.
I noticed that in Atonement, McEwen blurs the line between character memory and authorial intervention. Would that be an example of free indirect discourse creating unreliability?
Yes, Atonement is a strong modern example. It is also metafictional because it reveals its own artifice toward the end, which reframes everything and undermines earlier trust.
So metafictional devices can be a strategy to make the narrator unreliable by exposing the narrative as constructed?
Precisely. Authors like Kazuo Ishiguro do this subtly. In Never Let Me Go, the narrator is limited and polite, and the withholding of information creates moral ambiguity. The reader gradually discovers gaps in memory, which trigger reevaluation of what the narrator intends to hide.
What about timeline manipulation? I read that some modern novels present contradictory dates or altered sequences to signal unreliability.
Timeline discrepancies are a deliberate technique. When the narrator contradicts themselves about dates and events, that contradiction is a deliberate strategy to make readers doubt the narrator's moral authority.
That makes sense. It forces the reader to assemble the truth from clues. Are there linguistic markers that indicate unreliability?
Yes. Look for hedging language, evasive syntax, repeated qualifiers, and shifts in register. A narrator who frequently uses what I call epistemic hedges, like maybe, I think, or as far as I remember, signals limited knowledge or deliberate avoidance.
So the frequency of those hedges can be evidence rather than proof. How do readers distinguish unreliable narration from an honest but imperfect memory?
Readers look for systematic patterns. An occasional slip is human memory, but consistent contradictions, self-serving omissions, or narrative repairs that benefit the narrator point toward unreliability as a rhetorical strategy.
You mentioned self-serving omissions. Could you give a concrete example in a modern novel where omission alters interpretation?
In Gone Girl, Amy constructs a diary that misdirects the reader and omits motivations. The omissions are strategic. They manipulate sympathy and later reveal the narrator's role in events.
I see. Would you say that unreliable narrators always aim to deceive the reader, or can there be other functions?
Deception is one function, but not the only one. Unreliability can explore subjectivity, critique historical or social perspectives, or expose epistemological limits. It can also invite readers to become active interpreters or detectives.
So it has ethical and epistemic functions. How about emotional engagement? Do unreliable narrators increase empathy or distance?
They can do both. A sympathetic but unreliable narrator may increase empathy because the reader understands the narrator's blind spots. Conversely, discovering deception can create distance and force critical reflection on the narrator's motives.
Are there common pitfalls for writers who try to create unreliable narrators?
Yes, overdoing the unreliability can frustrate readers. Another pitfall is inconsistency without purpose. If contradictions do not cohere to a strategy, the technique will feel like an error rather than a deliberate device.
That is useful. For my paper, I also wanted to discuss reader response. How do contemporary critics evaluate unreadable or ambiguous narrators?
Critical response often hinges on whether the ambiguity yields insight. Critics praise unreliability when it illuminates theme, character, or ideology. They criticize it when it seems gimmicky or when it impedes narrative meaning.
Should I include methodological tools for close reading, like discourse analysis or stylistics, to support my claims?
Absolutely. Combine narratology with stylistic analysis. Present textual evidence such as hedges, contradictions, shifts in tense, and framed narratives. Then link those features to interpretive claims about authorial intent and reader effect.
Do you recommend any secondary sources or critics to cite?
Cite Wayne Booth on unreliable narrators, though he writes older material. For contemporary theory, use sections from Patricia Waugh on metafiction and James Phelan on narrative ethics. Also include recent articles on cognitive approaches to fiction.
That gives me a solid bibliography. For my conclusion, should I argue that unreliable narrators reflect cultural skepticism about truth in modernity?
Yes, that is a persuasive thesis. Connect narrative techniques to cultural conditions like media fragmentation and contested histories, but support the claim with textual examples and close reading.
Thank you. I will draft sections on rhetorical strategies, case studies from Fight Club, Gone Girl, and Atonement, and then a theoretical frame with Booth and Waugh.
Good plan. Bring me your draft when you have the case studies. We can work on tightening the argument and ensuring each example demonstrates a clear technique.
I will do that. One last quick question. When annotating passages, should I mark instances of hedging and contradiction separately?
Yes, mark them separately and note how they interact. Show where hedging supports a later contradiction, or where omission creates narrative repair. Those links will strengthen your analysis.
Great. Thanks again for the guidance. I will email you the draft by next Friday.
You're welcome, Marcus. I look forward to reading it.
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
When the narrator contradicts themselves about dates and events, that contradiction is a deliberate strategy to make readers doubt the narrator as moral authority.
This concludes the conversation portion. For more TOEFL practice tests and study materials, visit Spinta.org.